because I am already yours, whether you want me or not.
You're mad.
Completely. Irreversibly.
Welcome back to The Duke's Revenge, where the coldest hearts burn the hottest, and where the women society tried to bury rise from the ashes wearing crowns. I'm so grateful you're here with me tonight, wherever you are in this vast and complicated world, stealing a quiet moment to lose yourself in a story of obsession, murder, and the kind of love that survives every attempt to destroy it. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from right now? What time is it in your corner of the world? I want to know if you're curled up in Lagos at midnight, driving through rain in Seattle at dusk, or watching the stars appear over São Paulo. Drop your city and the hour in the comments below, because I love knowing that we're scattered across every continent, all of us drawn together by these tales of power and passion, and the courage it takes to keep living when everyone expects you to give up. Tonight's story begins at a graveside in 1847 Yorkshire, where a young woman in black stands alone in the rain, watching her second husband be lowered into the cold November earth. She is 25 years old. She has buried 2 husbands in 4 years. And behind her, the whispers have already begun. Whispers that will follow her through every ballroom and drawing room in England. Whispers that will make her a pariah, a monster, a curse given human form. They called her the Black Widow of Hartington. They said any man foolish enough to marry her would die within the year. They crossed themselves when she passed and shielded their sons from her gaze. But what society didn't know, what no one suspected, was that the most feared duke in England had been watching from the shadows for 6 months, investigating deaths that weren't accidents, building a case that would expose a murderer, and falling so dangerously, desperately obsessed with the cursed widow that he could no longer imagine a future that didn't include her. She thought no one believed in her innocence. She thought she would spend the rest of her life alone. She was wrong. And when he finally approached her at the lowest moment of her existence, he didn't offer condolences. He begged, "Curse me too." The riding crop whistled through the air before it struck. But this was not a beating. Not this time. This was something worse. This was the sound of the whip cracking against a horse's flank, the scream of the animal as it bolted, the sickening thud of a body hitting packed earth at velocity. Seraphina Colbourne would hear that sound, in her nightmares, for years to come. The moment her second husband died, the moment her life shattered for the second time in 4 years. She had been in the morning room when the stable boy came running, his face white with terror. "Lord Fairfax," he'd gasped. "There's been an accident. The horse bolted. He fell. He's not moving." By the time she reached the bridle path, Edward was already dead. His neck was broken, his body twisted at an angle that made her stomach heave. And around her, the servants were whispering, not about the tragedy, not about the loss, but about her. The curse. It's happened again. 2 husbands in 4 years. She killed him. Somehow, she killed him. 3 days later, she stood at his graveside in the pouring rain, watching the coffin descend into the earth, and felt the weight of 100 stairs pressing down on her like stones. No one stood with her. No one offered comfort. Even Edward's family, his mother and sisters, who had welcomed her so warmly when she'd first arrived at Westcliff Manor, kept their distance now, their faces closed with suspicion. She understood. She didn't blame them. 2 dead husbands would make anyone wonder. But understanding didn't make the loneliness easier to bear. "Lady Fairfax?" The voice came from behind her, low, careful, too familiar. Seraphina turned to find Lord Nathaniel Meredith standing a few feet away, his umbrella held at an angle that left her uncovered in the rain. He was Henry's younger brother, her first husband's kin, and his presence at Edward's funeral struck her as wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. "Lord Nathaniel," she forced civility into her voice, "thank you for coming." I could hardly stay away. He stepped closer, and something in his expression made her skin crawl, a quality she couldn't name, something predatory lurking behind his solicitous smile. "My brother's widow, burying her second husband. I wanted to offer my support. That's very kind. Kindness has nothing to do with it." His voice dropped, took on an intimate quality that felt wrong against the backdrop of the open grave. "I know what people are saying about you, Seraphina. I know the ton believes you're cursed, but I don't believe it. I never have." Seraphina studied him, this man who shared Henry's sandy hair and slight build, but possessed none of his warmth. There had always been something off about Nathaniel, a coldness beneath his charm, a calculation behind his courtesies. Henry had loved his younger brother, but Seraphina had never been able to warm to him. "I appreciate that, Lord Nathaniel. I also want you to know that you're not alone." He reached out and took her hand before she could stop him, his grip too tight, his fingers too insistent. "I will always be here for you. Whatever you need. Whatever capacity you might require." The implication hung in the air between them, ugly and unmistakable. Seraphina pulled her hand free. "You're very kind," she said again, the words clipped now. "But I should return to the house. There are arrangements to be made." "Of course." Nathaniel's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been frustration or anger, quickly suppressed. "I'll call on you next week to see how you're managing." "That won't be necessary. I insist." He stepped back, his umbrella tilting further away from her, and Seraphina realized with a chill that he had been letting the rain soak her deliberately, a petty cruelty disguised as carelessness. "Family looks after family, Seraphina. And you are family, whatever name you go by now." He walked away before she could respond, joining the stream of mourners retreating to their carriages. Seraphina stood alone by the grave, rain streaming down her face, and wondered why his words had sounded less like comfort and more like a threat. She stayed at the graveside until the gravediggers arrived to fill the hole. Only then did she turn and walk back toward Westcliff Manor, her black dress dragging in the mud, her future stretching before her like an endless gray landscape stripped of all hope. 2 husbands, 2 funerals, 2 sets of in-laws who now looked at her with suspicion instead of welcome. She was 25 years old, and society had already decided her fate. Cursed, untouchable, alone. That night, in her bedroom at Westcliff Manor, a room she would have to vacate within the week, since the estate passed to Edward's younger brother, Seraphina allowed herself to break. She climbed the servants' stairs to avoid anyone who might see her, closed the door to her chamber, and collapsed on the floor beside the bed, her knees drawn to her chest, her face buried in her hands. The sobs came in waves, great racking things that shook her entire body. She wept for Edward, who had been kind and gentle, and who had died 3 days ago on a bridle path he had ridden 100 times. She wept for Henry, who had loved her truly, and who had been stolen from her by a fever that struck without warning. She wept for herself, for the woman she had been before. Tragedy made her a monster, for the future she would never have, for the children she would never bear. She wept until her throat was raw, and her eyes were swollen, and there were no tears left. And then she lay on the cold floor, staring at the ceiling, and tried to find a reason to keep breathing. She didn't notice the rider on the hill above the churchyard earlier that day, watching her through the rain with an intensity that bordered on madness. She didn't see the way his scarred hands had tightened on the reins as her carriage pulled away, or the expression of anguished determination that crossed his severe features. She didn't know that everything was about to change. 40 miles away, in a study that had become a shrine to obsession, Caspian Wyndham, Duke of Stormhaven, hadn't slept in 3 days. The wall before him was covered with documents, death certificates, physicians' reports, witness statements, newspaper clippings, maps marked with locations, timelines drawn in his own precise hand. 6 months of investigation, meticulously organized and obsessively maintained. At the center of it all, a sketch of a woman's face stared back at him with gray eyes that haunted his every waking moment. Seraphina Colbourne, Lady Fairfax as she was now known, the woman society called cursed. The woman Caspian knew was innocent. He moved to his desk, where a collection of items sat arranged with reverent care, a pressed violet in a glass case, a flower she had worn at a charity concert 8 months ago, a lock of brown hair in a silver box, retrieved from a hairbrush she had discarded at a market stall, a calendar with every Thursday circled in red, the days she went to market, the days he could watch her from doorways and church alcoves, the days that had become the only thing keeping him alive. He knew how it looked. He knew it was madness. He didn't care. Your Grace. Graves, his investigator, entered the study with a fresh folder of documents. The man had served Caspian for 15 years, had seen him through war and grief and the long isolation that followed. He had never seen his employer like this, gaunt with sleeplessness, hollow with wanting, his aristocratic composure crumbling at the edges. The Westcliff physician's report has arrived. Caspian took the folder without looking away from the wall. Cause of death? Broken neck, consistent with a fall from a horse. The physician notes that Lord Fairfax was an excellent horseman, and the accident was unexpected. Unexpected. Caspian's laugh was bitter, broken. Yes, I imagine it was. Just as it was unexpected when Lord Hartington died of a fever that appeared suddenly and killed him within 48 hours. Just as it will be unexpected when whoever she marries next meets an untimely end, if anyone is fool enough to marry her after this. You believe she'll marry again? I believe someone wants to ensure she doesn't, unless it's to him. Caspian finally turned from the wall, and Graves saw what 6 months of investigation and obsession had done to him. The hollowed cheeks, the shadowed eyes, the tremor in his hands that spoke of too much brandy and too little food. Lord Nathaniel Meredith was at the funeral today. My observer saw him approach her at the graveside, saw him take her hand, saw her pull away. The first husband's brother, who stands to inherit the Meredith family fortune if Seraphina remains unmarried and childless. The first husband's brother, who was at Hartington Manor when Lord Henry fell ill with that convenient fever. The first husband's brother, who was visiting Westcliff Manor last week, just 3 days before Lord Edward's horse bolted on a bridle path the man had ridden 100 times without incident. Graves was quiet for a long moment. You believe Lord Nathaniel is killing her husbands? I don't believe it. I know it. Caspian moved to his desk, his fingers brushing the glass case that held the violet. I have testimony from the apothecary who sold him arsenic 2 weeks before Henry's death. I have a statement from a stable boy who saw a man matching Nathaniel's description in Westcliff's stables the night before Edward's accident. Saw him tampering with the horse's feed. I have financial records showing debts that can only be paid with the Meredith inheritance, an inheritance Nathaniel can only access if Seraphina dies childless or marries him. Then why haven't you acted? If you have evidence, because I don't have enough. Caspian's fist slammed against the desk, making the documents jump, making the violet tremble in its case. I have pieces, fragments, enough to convince myself but not enough to convince a magistrate. Nathaniel is clever. He's been planning this for years. He's built the curse narrative, positioned himself as her protector, created a web of suspicion around her that will deflect any accusation I make. If I move against him now, with incomplete evidence, he'll spin it. He'll paint me as the obsessed duke who fixated on a cursed widow and tried to destroy an innocent man to claim her for myself. And Lady Fairfax? Lady Fairfax will be ruined either way. Caspian's voice dropped to a whisper. She'll be the curse that drove another man mad, another name added to the list of men she's destroyed. Your Grace. Graves stepped closer, his voice careful. You've barely eaten in 3 days. You haven't slept in longer. This investigation, this obsession, it's destroying you. I know. Then stop. Hand the evidence to the magistrate. Let the law won't save her. Caspian looked at the sketch on his wall, at the gray eyes that seemed to hold a universe of sorrow. The law will look at the curse rumors and dismiss my evidence as the ravings of a madman. Nathaniel has powerful friends. He has charm and breeding and a spotless reputation. And I have. He gestured at the wall, at the shrine of documents and maps and stolen mementos. I have this, the obsessive ramblings of a duke who has never even spoken to the woman he claims to love. Love. Graves said the word carefully, as if testing its weight. Is that what this is? Caspian was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked gardens below. I saw her at a charity concert 8 months ago, he said quietly. She was standing in the back, in a black mourning dress. She was still in mourning for Henry then. Everyone else was watching the musicians, but I was watching her. And during the final movement, a cello suite, something heartbreaking, she closed her eyes. Your Grace. Her face changed. Caspian's voice cracked. The grief fell away, and she looked transported, like the music was the only beautiful thing left in her world, and she was trying to memorize it before it disappeared. And I thought, he stopped, swallowing hard. I thought, that is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and someone has hurt her, and I will find out who, and I will destroy them. That was 8 months ago. Yes, and I've spent every day since then building this case, gathering this evidence, watching her suffer while I waited for the right moment to act. Caspian turned from the window, and his expression was terrible in its intensity. She thinks she's cursed Graves. She thinks she's a monster. She thinks no one in the world believes she's innocent. And every day I wait is another day she spends alone with that lie, and I cannot. His voice broke. He pressed his hands to his face, his shoulders shaking with something that might have been sobs, or might have been rage. Graves waited in silence until the storm passed. Then he said, The Davenport Winter Ball is in 3 weeks. Lord Nathaniel has confirmed his attendance, and Lady Fairfax has been invited as well. Caspian's head came up. She never attends social events anymore. Lady Davenport sent a personal invitation. Apparently, she believes in rehabilitation and wishes to make a statement about the cruelty of unfounded rumors. Lady Davenport. Caspian knew the woman, a formidable matriarch with enough social power to rehabilitate or destroy anyone she chose. You think she's genuine? I think she's curious. The curse rumors have made Lady Fairfax the most fascinating woman in London, and Lady Davenport has always been drawn to fascinating women. If Lady Fairfax attends, it will be the social event of the season. 3 weeks. 3 more weeks of investigation. 3 more weeks of building his case while Seraphina suffered alone. I need more evidence, Caspian said. Something that ties Nathaniel directly to the deaths. Something that will hold up against his connections and his charm. The stable boy might testify publicly for the right price, and the apothecary kept detailed records. Get them. Get everything. I want the case airtight before that ball. Caspian moved back to his desk, his expression hardening into something like determination. Lord Nathaniel Meredith has destroyed 2 innocent men and spent 2 years watching the woman he claims to love suffer for crimes he committed. When I expose him, I want there to be no doubt. I want the world to see exactly what kind of monster has been hiding behind that charming smile. And after, when the truth is out and Lord Nathaniel is exposed, what then? Caspian looked at the sketch on his wall, the gray eyes, the determined jaw, the face of a woman who had survived 2 tragedies and emerged unbowed. Then I'll ask her to curse me too, he said, and pray she says yes. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in patient obsession and mounting desperation. Caspian continued his investigation while preparing for the Davenport Ball. He secured written testimony from the stable boy, a young man named Thomas, who had seen Lord Nathaniel in the Westcliff stables the night before Lord Edward's death, had watched him pour something into the horse's feed bin, had been too frightened to speak until Caspian offered him enough money to start a new life far from Yorkshire. He obtained the apothecary's records, meticulous documentation showing a purchase of arsenic by a man matching Lord Nathaniel's description, dated 2 weeks before Lord Henry's sudden illness. He documented Lord Nathaniel's debts, his gambling losses, the mounting financial pressure that made the Meredith inheritance his only salvation. And through it all, he watched Seraphina. He watched her move from Westcliff Manor to a small townhouse in London, a necessary economy, since Edward's estate had passed to his younger brother and left her with only her widow's portion. He watched her dismiss most of her servants. He watched her stop attending social events, retreat from a world that had made it clear she was unwelcome. He watched her at the Thursday markets, disguised in plain dress and a simple bonnet, counting coins with trembling fingers. He watched her at her husband's graves, laying flowers and whispering words he could not hear. He watched her walk through crowds that parted around her like she carried plague. And he documented everything. The calendar filled with red-circled dates, the drawer filled with items he had no right to possess, a ribbon she had dropped, a handkerchief she had left on a park bench, a pressed flower from a bouquet she had placed on Henry's grave. The sketch on his wall was joined by others, her face in profile, her face in three-quarter view, her face as he imagined it might look if she ever smiled. He was losing himself. He knew it. He didn't care. "You haven't eaten in 2 days." Graves found him one evening, sitting in the dark, the sketch of Seraphina the only illumination. "You haven't slept in longer. The ball is in 1 week. You need to be functional when you face her." "I am functional." "You're gaunt. You're hollow-eyed. You look like a man possessed." Graves's voice hardened. "Is that how you want her to see you for the first time? As a madman who can barely stand?" The words hit their target. Caspian looked down at himself, at the rumpled clothes, the trembling hands, the body he had been neglecting in his single-minded focus. "I can't stop thinking about her," he admitted. "I can't stop wondering what she's doing right now. Whether she's safe, whether she's eating, whether she's lying awake in the dark, believing herself cursed, believing no one in the world cares whether she lives or dies. Someone cares. You care. But she doesn't know that. She doesn't know I exist. She doesn't know that I've spent 6 months building a case to save her, that I've fallen in love with a woman I've never spoken to, that I would burn the world to ashes if it meant keeping her safe. Then tell her." Graves's voice was firm. "At the ball. Tell her everything. Show her the evidence. Make her understand that she's not alone. And if she doesn't believe me? If she thinks I'm just another man trying to manipulate her, then at least you'll have tried. At least you'll know you did everything in your power." Graves met his eyes. "You can't control her. Response, Your Grace. You can only control your actions. And right now, your actions are killing you." Caspian was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached for the plate of food Graves had brought and began to eat. Graves was right. He couldn't save Seraphina if he destroyed himself in the process. The night of the Davenport Ball arrived on a wave of frost and anticipation. Seraphina stood before her mirror, dressed in a gown of deep violet, the color of half-mourning, appropriate for her station, yet striking enough to command attention. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the neckline, and she pressed them flat against her stomach, willing herself to calm. She had not attended a social event in 8 months. She had not faced society since the whispers had transformed from sympathy to suspicion. But Lady Davenport's invitation had been impossible to refuse. A lifeline thrown by one of the most powerful women in England. An opportunity to prove that she was not the monster they believed her to be, or to confirm their suspicions once and for all. "You don't have to do this," Mrs. Hartwell said from the doorway, her companion, the only ally who had stayed when everyone else fled. "Lady Davenport would understand if you sent your regrets." Lady Davenport would understand nothing of the sort. Seraphina turned from the mirror, her expression composed, despite the terror beneath. "She invited me as a statement. If I refuse to attend, I prove the gossips right. And if you attend, and they destroy you, then at least I'll have tried." Seraphina lifted her chin. "I have done nothing wrong, Mrs. Hartwell. I loved both my husbands. I mourned both my husbands. And I refuse to spend the rest of my life hiding like a criminal." The carriage ride to the Davenport mansion was brief and silent. Seraphina spent it cataloging the ways tonight could go wrong, the cuts she might receive, the whispers she might hear, the possibility that Lady Davenport's invitation had been a cruel joke. But when her carriage arrived and the footman opened the door, she lifted her chin and stepped out with the grace of a duchess. She would not hide. She would not cower. She would walk into that ballroom and dare anyone to say to her face what they whispered behind her back. The entrance hall was packed with guests, and Seraphina felt the familiar sensation of being watched as she moved through the crowd. Conversations faltered when she passed. Fans fluttered up to hide smirking mouths. A clear path opened before her, not in deference, but in avoidance, as if her curse might be contagious. She kept walking. Lady Millicent Davenport met her at the entrance to the ballroom, a formidable woman in her 60s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Lady Fairfax," Lady Davenport's voice carried clearly, designed to be overheard. "How wonderful that you could join us." "Thank you for your gracious invitation, Lady Davenport." "Nonsense. I invited you, because you're the most interesting woman in London, and I refuse to throw dull parties." Lady Davenport took her arm with proprietary firmness. "Come. There are people you should meet." She led Seraphina into the ballroom, and the crowd parted before them in deference to Lady Davenport's power. They stopped near a window, where Lady Davenport positioned Seraphina with strategic precision. "Stay here," Lady Davenport instructed. "Look mysterious and slightly tragic. It suits you." She swept away, leaving Seraphina alone in a pool of candlelight, with 100 eyes watching her every move. The whispers began immediately. "Can you believe she had the audacity to come? 2 husbands dead, and she shows up in violet like she's celebrating. I heard Lord Nathaniel has been calling on her. Perhaps she's already hunting for number 3. Shameless. Absolutely shameless." Seraphina kept her expression composed, but each word landed like a blow. She had known it would be bad. She had not realized it would be this bad, this constant, this visceral, this inescapable. She was reaching for a glass of champagne, something to occupy her trembling hands, when a woman materialized at her side. Beautiful, cold-eyed, dressed in silver silk that matched her icy smile. "Lady Fairfax," the woman's voice dripped with false sweetness. "How brave of you to show your face tonight." "I'm sorry. I don't believe we've met." "Lady Millicent Thornberry. My late husband was a friend of Lord Hartington's, your first victim." She said the word casually, as if discussing the weather. "Tell me, does it become easier? The killing, I mean. Or do you still feel something when you watch them die?" Seraphina's blood ran cold. "I haven't killed anyone." "Of course not. It's a curse, isn't it? You can't help it." Lady Millicent's voice dropped to a hiss. "Though I wonder, if you know you're cursed, why do you keep marrying? One might almost think you enjoy it. I don't. 2 husbands dead before 30, and still you parade yourself at balls, looking for number 3. Lady Millicent leaned closer, her breath hot against Seraphina's ear. "You're a monster, Lady Fairfax. A Black Widow in violet silk, and everyone here knows it." She swept away before Seraphina could respond, leaving a wake of whispers and pointed stares. Seraphina stood frozen, her composure cracking. She had expected cruelty, but not this. Not a direct accusation of murder, delivered with a smile in a crowded ballroom. She needed to leave. She needed to find Lady Davenport and make her excuses, and retreat to her townhouse, and never. "Lady Fairfax." A new voice, male, low. Seraphina turned and felt her breath stop in her throat. He was tall, taller than either of her husbands had been, with broad shoulders and dark hair, and a face that might have been handsome if not for the severity of its expression. A scar ran along his left cheekbone, silver white against bronzed skin, lending him an air of danger that his impeccable evening clothes could not disguise. But it was his eyes that held her, dark as a moonless night, burning with an intensity that made her feel as if she were the only person in the room. "Do I know you?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "No." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell sandalwood and something darker. "But I know you. I've known you for 6 months. I don't understand." "I know." Something flickered in his expression. Pain, perhaps, or guilt. "And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a great many things. But I'm not sorry I came here tonight. And I'm not sorry I finally have the chance to tell you what I should have told you months ago." Seraphina's heart was pounding. "Who are you?" "Caspian Wyndham, Duke of Stormhaven." He didn't bow, didn't perform any of the social niceties that should have accompanied such an introduction. He simply looked at her with burning intensity. "And I've come to tell you that you're not cursed, Seraphina. You've never been cursed. You've been the victim of a murderer who has killed 2 men to possess you and will kill again if someone doesn't stop him." The world tilted beneath Seraphina's feet. She reached out blindly, her hand finding his arm, gripping hard enough to feel the muscle beneath his coat. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Henry died of fever. Edward's horse threw him. There was nothing. Henry was poisoned with arsenic. The fever was a symptom, not a cause. And Edward's horse was drugged. I have testimony from a stable boy who saw a stranger tampering with the horse's feed the night before the accident." Caspian's voice was quiet, intense, meant for her ears alone. "Someone has been killing your husbands, Lady Fairfax. Someone who wants you isolated and dependent on him." "Who?" "Lord Nathaniel Meredith." The name hit her like a physical blow. Nathaniel, Henry's brother. The man who had been at both estates, before both deaths. The man who looked at her with hunger barely disguised as concern. "No," she breathed. "That's not. He wouldn't. He would. He did." Caspian reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. This is a receipt from an apothecary in York, dated 2 weeks before your first husband's death. The purchaser was a man matching Lord Nathaniel's description. The purchase was arsenic. Seraphina took the document with trembling hands. The writing blurred before her eyes, but she could make out the date, the amount, the signature. "Why are you telling me this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why now?" "Because Lord Nathaniel is here tonight. Because if someone doesn't act soon, he'll find a way to claim you, or destroy you." Caspian's hands curled into fists at his sides. "And because I am not capable of watching you suffer for one more day." "Watching me?" Seraphina looked up at him. "You said you've known me for 6 months. What does that mean?" "It means I've been investigating the deaths since shortly after Lord Fairfax died. It means I've been building a case against Lord Nathaniel." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with confession. "It means I've been watching you, Seraphina, following your movements, documenting your life. And somewhere in the process, I've fallen so hopelessly in love with you that I can no longer separate the investigation from the obsession." Before Seraphina could respond, a familiar voice cut through the moment. "Lady Fairfax, how delightful to see you." Lord Nathaniel Meredith approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, his gaze flickering between Seraphina and the Duke with barely concealed suspicion. "Lord Nathaniel," Seraphina's voice came out surprisingly steady. "I didn't realize you would be attending. When I heard you would be here, I knew I had to come, to support you." His attention shifted to Caspian. "Your Grace, I wasn't aware you were acquainted with Lady Fairfax." "We've just met." Caspian's voice was ice. "How fortunate." Nathaniel moved closer to Seraphina, his hand reaching for her arm. "If you'll excuse us, Your Grace, Lady Fairfax and I have family matters to discuss." "No." The word came from Seraphina before she could stop it. Quiet, but absolute. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no." Seraphina stepped back, out of his reach. "I don't wish to discuss anything with you, Lord Nathaniel. Not tonight. Not ever." Something ugly flickered across Nathaniel's face, surprise giving way to anger, quickly suppressed. "Seraphina, you're upset. Let me take you somewhere quiet." The lady said no. Caspian stepped forward, his greater height and breadth making Nathaniel seem small by comparison. "I suggest you respect her wishes." "And I suggest you mind your own business." Nathaniel's composure cracked, revealing the fury beneath. "You have no claim on her, Stormhaven. What happens between Lady Fairfax and her family is none of your concern. Everything that happens to Lady Fairfax is my concern." Caspian's voice dropped to a whisper that promised violence. "And I'm warning you now, Meredith. If you approach her again, if you so much as look at her without her permission, I will make you regret the day you were born." The ballroom had gone silent. Hundreds of eyes watched the confrontation, whispers rising like smoke. Nathaniel's face went white with rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Both of you." He turned and pushed through the crowd, his elegant retreat belied by the fury in his movements. And Seraphina stood in the wreckage of the moment, her heart pounding, her mind reeling with everything she had just learned. "I need to leave," she heard herself say. "I can't." "My carriage is outside." Caspian's voice was gentle now. All the cold fury reserved for Nathaniel vanished. "Let me take you somewhere safe, somewhere we can talk." Seraphina looked at him, this stranger who had just publicly threatened one of society's most well-connected men on her behalf. "Yes," she said. "Take me somewhere safe." Caspian offered his arm. Seraphina took it. And as they walked out of the ballroom together, the ton watched in shocked silence, already rewriting the narrative they had so carefully constructed. The carriage ride to Caspian's townhouse passed in weighted silence. When they arrived, he led her to a private study and poured 2 glasses of brandy without asking. "Drink," he said. "You've had a shock." Seraphina drank. The brandy steadied her nerves. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning." So he did. He told her about his initial investigation, how he had heard the curse rumors and found them suspicious. He told her about the evidence, the arsenic purchase, the stable boy's testimony, the pattern of Lord Nathaniel's presence at both estates. He told her about watching her for 6 months, about following her to markets and churches and graves, about the sketch he had commissioned, the violet he had kept, the calendar where he marked every day since he had first seen her face. He told her about the obsession, the sleepless nights, the inability to think of anything but her safety, her suffering, her survival. By the time he finished, the brandy was gone, and the fire had burned low. "You've been watching me for 6 months," Seraphina said slowly, "following me, keeping pieces of me like trophies, like treasures." Caspian's voice was quiet. "Like the most precious things I've ever possessed. That's not normal." "No, it's not." He met her eyes. "I've been obsessed with a woman who didn't know I existed. And I understand, if that frightens you. If you want to walk out that door and never see me again, I will give you all my evidence and disappear. But I don't want you to leave." His voice cracked. "I want to stay. I want to help you bring Lord Nathaniel to justice. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you are not cursed." Seraphina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Show me." "Show you?" "The evidence, the investigation, everything you've gathered." Caspian led her to the room. It was exactly as she had feared, and exactly as she had hoped. Walls covered with documents and sketches and timelines, maps marked with locations, evidence organized with military precision, and at the center, her face, rendered in charcoal by an artist who had clearly worked from careful observation. But there was more, a dozen additional sketches of her face, different angles, different expressions, all rendered with devotion. The violet under glass, a silver box that, when she opened it, contained a lock of brown hair. A calendar with every Thursday circled in red. "This is me," she said, touching the sketch. "This is how you see me. This is how you are. Strong, beautiful, unbroken despite everything." Seraphina turned to face him. They were standing very close now, close, enough that she could see the rapid pulse beating at his throat. "Why?" she asked. "Why me? You could have any woman in England." "Because you're not cursed. Because you're extraordinary. Because I saw you at that concert, and you closed your eyes during the cello suite, and I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought, that is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and someone has hurt her, and I will find out who. You don't know me. You've watched me, but then teach me." He reached out, his fingers hovering near her face. "Let me learn who you are. Give me the chance to fall in love with the real you." Seraphina searched his face for deception and found none. Only hope, only longing, only desperate vulnerability. "I can't promise anything," she said finally. "You don't have to promise anything. You just have to let me try." She should have said no. Instead, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, questioning, but then Caspian's arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and the gentleness gave way to something fiercer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Seraphina said, "Curse me too, and we'll see who destroys whom." The weeks that followed were a careful dance of investigation and courtship. Caspian shared everything with Seraphina, every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every thread of the case against Lord Nathaniel. They worked together, strategizing, planning, building toward the moment when they could expose him publicly. And in the spaces between strategy sessions, they learned each other. Seraphina discovered that Caspian's severity masked a dry wit and a tender heart. That he had lost his parents young and built walls around himself that few had ever breached. That he laughed rarely but meant it when he did. Caspian discovered that Seraphina's composure masked a fierce intelligence and a stubborn courage. That she had loved both her husbands genuinely, mourned them deeply, and refused to let grief define her. That she snorted when she laughed too hard, which he found mortifying, and he found enchanting. They fell in love properly this time, not through observation but through conversation, not through surveillance, but through surrender. It was, Seraphina thought, the happiest she had been in years. And then she found the calendar. She had been searching Caspian's study for a document they needed, a witness statement he had misplaced. The drawer was stuck, and when she finally wrenched it open, papers scattered across the floor, including a calendar from the previous year. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. Dates marked in red, notes in Caspian's precise hand, a timeline that stretched back further than 6 months, back to before Edward's death, back to before Edward's accident. And then she saw the entry dated 3 days before Edward died. N.M. observed at Westcliff Stables. Suspicious activity. Evidence of tampering with horse feed. Do not intervene. Need more evidence before confrontation. Do not intervene. Caspian had known. He had known that Lord Nathaniel was planning something. He had known Edward was in danger. And he had chosen not to intervene, had chosen to let her husband die so he could build his case. Seraphina. Caspian stood in the doorway, his face going pale as he saw what she held. You knew. Her voice came out strangled. 3 days before Edward died, you knew something was wrong, and you did nothing. I didn't know he would. You suspected. You observed suspicious activity. You saw evidence of tampering. She was shaking now, the calendar crumpling in her grip. And you let him die. I was trying to build a case. You were trying to save me. The words came out bitter, poisonous. That's what you told me. You were trying to save me. But you could have saved him. You could have warned us. You could have stopped it. Before, I didn't know it would happen so fast. Caspian's composure shattered. I thought I had time. I thought I could gather more evidence before my husband was murdered. Seraphina's voice rose to a scream. Before I buried another man I loved while you watched from the shadows, building your case, waiting for the right moment. Seraphina, please, don't. She held up her hand, stopping him mid-step. Don't come near me. Don't touch me. Don't. Her voice broke. You let him die. You could have saved him, and you let him die. I'm sorry. Caspian's voice was ragged. I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I don't care what you thought. I care what you did. Seraphina dropped the calendar and backed toward the door. I trusted you. I let you in. I let you. She stopped, unable to continue. Please, Caspian whispered. Please don't go. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You had evidence that my husband was in danger, and you chose your investigation over his life. You chose your obsession over my happiness. She reached the door and stopped, looking back at him with eyes that held nothing but devastation. I thought you were different. I thought you saw me as a person, not a prize. But you're just like Nathaniel, aren't you? Just another man who thinks he knows what's best for me. That's not true. I love you. You don't love me. You love the idea of saving me. You love being the hero. She opened the door. "Well, congratulations, Your Grace. You've destroyed your villain. Now leave me alone to bury what's left of my life." She walked out before he could respond, and Caspian stood alone in his study, surrounded by evidence of his sins, and felt something inside him shatter into 1,000 pieces. The 6 weeks that followed were the worst of Caspian's life. He didn't eat. Food turned to ash in his mouth. He lost weight rapidly, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that had already been lean. He didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Seraphina's face. The devastation, the betrayal, the moment she had looked at him and seen not a savior, but a monster. He didn't work. Documents piled up unread. Correspondence went unanswered. The investigation into Lord Nathaniel ground to a halt because Caspian could no longer summon the will to pursue it. He sat in his study in the dark, the sketch of Seraphina propped on his knee, and slowly destroyed himself. Your Grace. Graves found him on the 15th day, slumped in his chair, his face gaunt and gray, his hands trembling with weakness. "She's gone," Caspian said without looking up. "She found the calendar. She knows I could have saved Edward. And she left. She said I was just like Nathaniel, another man who thinks he knows what's best for her." Graves was quiet for a long moment. Was she wrong? Caspian closed his eyes. No, she wasn't wrong. I told myself I was building a case. I told myself I needed more evidence. But the truth is, his voice broke. The truth is that I was afraid that if I intervened too soon, I would lose my chance with her. Afraid that if I warned Edward, he would survive, and she would stay with him, and I would never. He couldn't finish. "You wanted him dead," Graves said quietly. "Not consciously, perhaps, but some part of you wanted him out of the way." "Yes." The admission was barely a whisper. "God help me, yes. I wanted him dead so I could have her. And I let it happen. I watched from the shadows while a man was murdered, and I did nothing because some sick, twisted part of me wanted exactly this outcome. And now? Now she's gone." Caspian opened his eyes, and they were hollow, empty. "Now she knows what I am. And she was right to leave. She was right about everything. So you're giving up. What else can I do? I can't undo what I did. I can't bring Edward back. I can't erase the fact that I let a man die because I wanted his wife." "You can finish what you started." Graves's voice hardened. "Lord Nathaniel is still out there. Still dangerous. Still planning whatever he's planning. Lady Fairfax may never forgive you, but you can still protect her. You can still expose the man who killed her husbands. She doesn't want my protection. Perhaps not, but she deserves it anyway." Graves stood. "You made a terrible mistake. You let a man die because you wanted what he had. But you can't change the past. You can only choose what to do now." He left before Caspian could respond, and Caspian sat alone in the darkness, surrounded by the evidence of his sins, and tried to find a reason to keep breathing. Seraphina was not faring much better. She had returned to her townhouse and dismissed all visitors. She had spent 3 days in bed, crying until she had no tears left. She had replayed every moment with Caspian, searching for signs she should have seen, red flags she should have noticed. He had let Edward die. He had known, or suspected, that something was wrong, and he had chosen his investigation over her husband's life. Everything he had told her was true. The evidence against Lord Nathaniel was real, but it was poisoned now, tainted by the knowledge that Caspian could have prevented at least one death and had chosen not to. She couldn't trust him. She couldn't trust anyone. And so she was alone again, more alone than before, because now she knew what it felt like to not be alone. Now she knew what she was missing. The knock came on the 20th day. Mrs. Hartwell appeared in her doorway, her face troubled. "Lady Fairfax, there's a visitor. Lady Vivian Crawford. She says she's a friend of the Duke of Stormhaven's." Seraphina's heart clenched. "Send her away." "She says it's urgent. She says..." Mrs. Hartwell hesitated. "She says the Duke is dying." Seraphina went still. "What do you mean, dying?" She didn't say, just that he hasn't eaten or slept in weeks, that he's wasting away, that she's worried he won't survive much longer. Seraphina told herself she didn't care. She told herself that whatever happened to Caspian was his own doing. She told herself that she owed him nothing, not after what he had done. But she couldn't stop herself from saying, "Send her in." Lady Vivian Crawford was everything Seraphina was not. Blonde, beautiful, polished in a way that spoke of generations of wealth and breeding. She swept into the drawing room with the confidence of a woman who had never been denied anything in her life. "Lady Fairfax," her smile was warm but calculating. "Thank you for seeing me. You said the Duke is dying. I said he's wasting away. Whether he dies depends on factors beyond my control." Lady Vivian settled into a chair without being invited. "I've known Caspian since we were children. We were promised to each other once, an informal understanding between our families. Everyone expected us to marry. And then he saw you at that concert, and suddenly I didn't exist anymore. You're jealous. I was jealous. Now I'm just worried." Lady Vivian leaned forward. "He hasn't eaten in weeks, Lady Fairfax. He sits in that study of his, staring at a sketch of your face, and slowly destroys himself. I've never seen him like this. Whatever happened between you, whatever he did, it's killing him. That's not my concern, isn't it?" Lady Vivian's eyes sharpened. "You're the reason he's like this. And I thought you should know before it's too late." Seraphina felt something twist in her chest. "You don't know what he did." "Then tell me." She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "He knew my husband was in danger. He had evidence that something was wrong, and he chose not to intervene. He let Edward die so he could build his case against the real killer." Lady Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That's terrible. Yes. That's unforgivable. Yes. And yet..." "Larawa." Vivian met her eyes. "You're still here. You're still listening. You haven't thrown me out or refused to discuss it. What's your point?" "My point is that you still love him." Lady Vivian's voice gentled. "Despite what he did, despite the betrayal, some part of you still cares what happens to him, or you wouldn't have agreed to see me." Seraphina wanted to deny it. She wanted to say that she felt nothing for Caspian except contempt, but the words wouldn't come because they weren't true. She did still love him. That was the worst part. She loved him despite everything, and she hated herself for it. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "I can't trust him. I can't be with someone who would make that choice." "Perhaps not." Lady Vivian stood. "But you could at least see him. Let him explain. Let him apologize. Why do you care? What is he to you?" Something flickered across Lady Vivian's perfect features. Something that looked like old pain, carefully suppressed. "He was supposed to be everything to me," she said quietly. "We were promised to each other. Everyone expected us to marry. And then he met you, or rather, he saw you, and suddenly I didn't exist anymore. He broke our understanding without a second thought. You're still in love with him." "I was. Now I'm just..." Lady Vivian shook her head. "He loved me once, or I thought he did. But the way he loves you is different. It's consuming him. And if you don't at least give him a chance to make things right, it will destroy him." She moved toward the door, then paused. He's not perfect, Lady Fairfax. He made a terrible choice, and you have every right to hate him for it. But he's not a monster. He's a man who loved you so much he lost himself in it. And I thought you should know that before you let him die. She left before Seraphina could respond, and Seraphina sat alone in her drawing room, Lady Vivian's words echoing in her mind, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel: jealousy. Pure, irrational, consuming jealousy at the thought of Caspian loving anyone else, even in the past, at the thought of Lady Vivian knowing him since childhood, sharing memories and history that Seraphina would never have, at the thought of another woman caring whether he lived or died. She had told herself she didn't care what happened to him. She had told herself that whatever he suffered, he deserved. But the thought of losing him, really losing him, to death or to another woman, was unbearable. And that, more than anything Lady Vivian had said, told her what she needed to do. She found him in his study, exactly where Lady Vivian had described. He was sitting in a chair by the cold fireplace, the sketch of her face propped on his knee, his body so thin and wasted that she barely recognized him. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost at least 2 stone. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones sharp beneath gray skin, his eyes hollow and haunted. He didn't look up when she entered. He didn't seem to register her presence at all. Caspian. His head lifted slowly, as if the motion required more strength than he possessed. When he saw her, his expression flickered. Hope, quickly suppressed by something like fear. You came. His voice was barely a whisper, rough with disuse. I didn't expect. Lady Vivian visited me. She said you were dying. Lady Vivian. A ghost of a smile crossed his ravaged features. She always was dramatic. She said you hadn't eaten or slept in weeks. She said you were wasting away. Seraphina moved closer, cataloging the damage, the hollow cheeks, the trembling hands, the body that seemed to be consuming itself. She wasn't exaggerating. No. Caspian set the sketch aside, his movements careful and slow. She wasn't. Why? Why what? Why are you doing this to yourself? You let Edward die. That was your choice. Why are you punishing yourself now? Because I killed him. The words came out flat, emotionless. Not directly. Not with my own hands. But I saw the evidence. I knew something was wrong, and I chose to wait. I chose my case over his life. I chose you over him. You didn't choose me. You chose your obsession. My obsession is you. Caspian's voice cracked. Everything I did, every choice I made, was because I wanted you. I wanted you so badly that I let a man die. I let your husband die because some sick, twisted part of me wanted him out of the way. That's not. It is. He met her eyes, and she saw the full weight of his self-loathing. I told myself it was about justice, about building a case. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I wanted you, and I let a man die to get you. Seraphina stared at him, this man she had loved and hated, and couldn't stop thinking about. He was confessing to something monstrous, and yet the confession itself was a kind of honesty she had never received from anyone else. You're telling me you're a monster, she said slowly. Yes. You're telling me you let my husband die because you wanted me for yourself. Yes. And you expect me to forgive you? No. Caspian's voice was hollow. I don't expect anything. I don't deserve anything. I just wanted you to know the truth. The whole truth. Not the version I told myself. Just the ugly, unforgivable reality of what I did. Seraphina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Lady Vivian told me you were supposed to marry her. Caspian blinked, clearly thrown by the change of subject. What? She said you were promised to each other as children, that everyone expected you to marry, that you broke the understanding without a second thought when you saw me at that concert. Yes, that's true. She said she's never seen anyone love the way you love me. Also true. Caspian's voice was barely audible. I've never felt anything like this. It's consuming me. It's destroying me. And I would endure it 1,000 times over if it meant keeping you safe. Even if I never forgive you. Even then. He met her eyes, and the desperation in his gaze made her chest ache. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Seraphina. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know, whatever happens, whatever you decide, I will spend the rest of my life making sure Lord Nathaniel pays for what he did. And if I do want to see you again— Caspian went still. What? You heard me. Seraphina moved closer, close enough to touch him. What if I told you I still love you? What if I said that I hate what you did, but I can't stop thinking about you? What if I said that hearing Lady Vivian talk about loving you made me want to scratch her eyes out? I would say— Caspian's voice broke. I would say that's more than I deserve. More than I ever hoped for. It is. You're right. You don't deserve it. Seraphina reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his hollowed cheek. But I'm giving it anyway, because I'm tired of being alone. Because I'm tired of punishing both of us for a mistake neither of us can undo. Because— her voice cracked. Because I love you, you stupid, obsessive, self-destructive man. And I'm not going to let you destroy yourself over guilt when there's a murderer still walking free. Caspian's eyes filled with tears. Seraphina, don't speak. Just eat something. Sleep. Get your strength back. She pressed her forehead to his. We have work to do. Lord Nathaniel is still out there, and I want to be the one to destroy him. Together? Together. Seraphina pulled back and met his eyes. But first, you need to live. Can you do that for me? I can do anything for you. Caspian's voice was rough with emotion. I would burn the world for you. I know. She kissed him softly. I know. Now eat. She stayed with him through the night, making sure he ate, making sure he slept, making sure he didn't slip back into the darkness that had nearly consumed him. And when morning came, she was still there, curled against his side, her hand pressed over his heart. He was still alive. She was still there. And together, they would finish what they had started. The trap was set for Lord Nathaniel at the Ashworth Winter Ball, 3 weeks later. Caspian had recovered enough to stand without swaying, though his clothes still hung loose on a frame that hadn't fully regained its strength. The evidence was compiled, the witnesses were ready, and Lady Davenport, who had been quietly informed of the situation, had agreed to host the confrontation. All that remained was the execution. Seraphina entered the ballroom on Caspian's arm, dressed in a gown of deep crimson that made her look like a phoenix rising from ashes. The crowd parted around them, not in curiosity this time, but in active avoidance. The whispers started immediately. The cursed widow and the obsessed Duke. I heard he's been following her for months. 2 monsters who deserve each other. Can you believe Lady Davenport invited them? They walked deeper into the ballroom, and the crowd drew back on all sides, creating a visible perimeter of rejection. Ladies turned their backs. Gentlemen found elsewhere to look. Within moments, Seraphina and Caspian stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by a wasteland of cut and shun. Seraphina's chin was lifted with stubborn dignity, but her hand trembled where it rested on Caspian's arm. They hate us both now, she whispered. Let them. Caspian's voice was calm, steady. Their opinion ceased to matter the moment I chose you. Even if they never accept us? even if we spend the rest of our lives being shunned? Even then, he covered her trembling hand with his own. I would rather be hated with you than loved by anyone else. Seraphina looked up at him, this man who had sacrificed his reputation, his social standing, everything for her. And she felt something shift inside her chest. I love you, she said. I don't think I've ever said it properly, without qualification, without reservation. I love you, Caspian Wyndham, even if the whole world hates us. I love you too. He smiled, a real smile, despite everything. Now, let's destroy the man who did this to us. Lord Nathaniel was already there, holding court near the refreshment table, his charming smile firmly in place. When he saw Seraphina enter on Caspian's arm, something flickered across his features. Surprise, then anger, then calculation. He approached them with deliberate casualness, his voice carrying just enough to be overheard. Lady Fairfax and his Grace, what a fascinating pairing. The cursed widow and the Duke who's thrown away his reputation to pursue her. Lord Nathaniel, Seraphina's voice was steady. I didn't expect to see you here. And miss this spectacle? Nathaniel laughed. The Tun is already calling you both mad. I merely came to witness the entertainment. Then you'll want to stay for the finale. Caspian stepped forward, his expression cold. I have some entertainment of my own to provide. Oh? Nathaniel's smile didn't waver, but something in his eyes sharpened. And what entertainment might that be? The truth. Caspian raised his voice, and the ballroom fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I have a story to tell. A story about murder and obsession, and the man who destroyed 2 innocent lives to possess a woman who would never want him. The crowd was buzzing now, whispers rising on all sides. I have spent 8 months investigating the deaths of Lord Henry Meredith and Lord Edward Fairfax, Caspian continued, producing a sheaf of documents from his coat. I have gathered testimony, documented evidence, and built a case that will hold up in any court in England. This is absurd, Nathaniel cut in, his voice rising. You're mad, Stormhaven? Everyone knows. This! Caspian held up the first document is a receipt from an apothecary in York, dated 2 weeks before Lord Henry's death. The purchaser was a man matching Lord Nathaniel's description. The purchase was arsenic, enough to cause the exact symptoms that killed him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nathaniel's face went pale. This, Caspian produced another document, is sworn testimony from a stable boy at Westcliff Manor. He saw Lord Nathaniel in the stables the night before Lord Edward's accident. He saw him tampering with the horse's feed. That boy is lying. And this, Caspian's voice hardened, is a record of Lord Nathaniel's debts. Gambling losses, creditors threatening legal action. He is facing financial ruin unless he can access the Meredith family fortune. A fortune he can only inherit if Lady Fairfax dies childless or marries him. The crowd was in uproar now, voices rising in shock and outrage. This is preposterous! Nathaniel's composure finally cracked. You can't prove any of this. You're a madman who's been stalking a widow for months. Everyone knows it. The magistrate is waiting in Lady Davenport's study, Caspian said, his voice cutting through the chaos, along with the witnesses who will testify to everything I've said. Lord Nathaniel Meredith, you are... But Nathaniel had stopped listening. His eyes had found Seraphina, and something in his expression shifted, from calculation to desperation, to something that looked like madness. You did this, he breathed. You turned him against me. He lunged. Not toward Caspian, toward Seraphina. His hand closed around her throat before anyone could react, his fingers squeezing, his face twisted with rage. "If I can't have you," he hissed, "no one will." Seraphina couldn't breathe. The world was narrowing to a point, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. She clawed at his hands, but he was too strong, his grip too tight. And then Caspian was there. He hit Nathaniel with the full force of his body, driving him backward, breaking his grip on Seraphina's throat. She collapsed to the floor, gasping, as Caspian bore Nathaniel down, his fist connecting with the man's face once, twice, 3 times. "You will never touch her again," Caspian growled, his voice barely human. "You will never look at her. You will never speak her name. You will rot in prison for the rest of your miserable life, and every day you will know that she survived you, that she won, that she is loved and safe and happy, while you are nothing but a footnote in her story. Your Grace," Lady Davenport's voice cut through the chaos. "The magistrate—" Caspian stepped back, his chest heaving, his knuckles bloody. Nathaniel lay on the floor, his face a ruin, his elegant facade stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. "Take him," Caspian said. Footmen moved in, seizing Nathaniel's arms, dragging him upright. He struggled weakly, still spitting curses, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This isn't over," he screamed as they dragged him toward the door. "She's mine. She's always been mine." "She's not yours." Caspian's voice was quiet, absolute. "She never was, and she never will be." The doors closed behind them, cutting off Nathaniel's screams. And Caspian turned to find Seraphina still on the floor, her hand pressed to her throat, her eyes wet with tears. "Are you hurt?" He knelt beside her, his hands gentle on her face. "Did he?" "I'm fine." Her voice was hoarse, but she was smiling. "I'm fine. It's over. It's finally over." "Yes." Caspian pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest. "It's over." Around them, the ballroom was in chaos. Guests shouting, servants running, Lady Davenport directing traffic with the efficiency of a general. But Seraphina and Caspian stayed where they were, kneeling on the marble floor, holding each other, as if the world might end if they let go. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone started to clap. It was slow at first, a single pair of hands, tentative and uncertain. But then another joined in, and another, until the applause was thunderous, filling the ballroom like a wave. Seraphina looked up, tears streaming down her face, and saw something she had never expected to see: approval. The same people who had shunned her, who had whispered about her curse, who had turned their backs when she entered. They were applauding now. They were watching her with expressions of admiration instead of suspicion, of respect instead of fear. She had faced her tormentor. She had survived his final attack, and she had emerged victorious. She was not cursed. She had never been cursed. And now everyone knew it. "I think," Caspian murmured against her hair, "that we may have just become the most popular couple in London." Seraphina laughed, a wet, broken, joyful sound. "I don't care about popularity." "Neither do I." He pulled back to look at her. "I only care about you." "Then take me home," she said. "And never let me go." The trial was swift and decisive. The evidence was overwhelming. The apothecary identified Nathaniel as the purchaser of the arsenic. The stableboy testified to seeing him tamper with the horse's feed. Financial records showed the depth of his debts and the desperate need that had driven him to murder. And 100 witnesses had seen him try to strangle Seraphina in the middle of a ballroom. Nathaniel was convicted on all counts and sentenced to hang. Seraphina attended every day of the trial. She watched as the truth emerged, the full scope of Nathaniel's obsession, the calculated cruelty of his crimes. She watched as society finally understood that she had never been cursed, only victimized. and she watched as Caspian sat beside her through every session, his hand holding hers, his presence steady and unwavering. "It's over," he said, when the verdict was delivered. "He can never hurt you again." "I know." Seraphina leaned against him. "I know." But it wasn't quite over. Not yet. The social rehabilitation came swiftly and completely. Lady Davenport, as promised, became Seraphina's champion. She hosted dinners where Seraphina was the guest of honor. She introduced her to the most influential women in London. She made it clear that anyone who mentioned the old curse rumors would find themselves permanently excluded from polite society. The whispers transformed, from Black Widow to survivor, from cursed to wrongly accused, from monster to heroine. And through it all, Caspian was at her side. "Marry me," he said one evening, as they walked through the gardens of his estate. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I can never undo what I did. But I love you, Seraphina, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." Seraphina looked at him, this scarred, severe, obsessive man who had burned himself to ashes for her and risen again. "Yes," she said, "but I have conditions. Anything. No more surveillance. No more watching me from the shadows. If you want to know something about me, you ask. Done. No more making decisions about my safety without consulting me. I am not a damsel to be protected. I am your partner. Done. And," she hesitated, "I want you to forgive yourself. Not today. Not tomorrow. But eventually. I want you to stop punishing yourself for Edward's death." Caspian was quiet for a long moment. "That may take time." "We have time." Seraphina took his hands. "We have the rest of our lives." "Then yes." Caspian's voice was rough with emotion. "To everything." "Yes." He kissed her there in the garden, surrounded by roses and moonlight, and Seraphina felt something she had never expected to feel again. Boom. The wedding took place in high summer, in the chapel at Stormhaven, with half the county in attendance. Seraphina wore ivory silk and carried white roses, the same flowers she had laid on her husband's graves, transformed now into a symbol of new beginnings. Caspian wept when he saw her walking down the aisle, this fearsome duke undone by the sight of the woman he loved. "I, Caspian Nathaniel Wyndham, take thee, Seraphina Grace Colbourne." The words rang through the chapel, binding them together with the weight of law and love. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the cheer that rose from the guests was genuine and heartfelt. "Duchess of Stormhaven," Caspian murmured against her lips after he kissed her. "Seraphina Wyndham. My wife." "Your wife," she smiled. "Even though you're occasionally terrifying." "Only occasionally? The rest of the time you're merely obsessive." He laughed, a real laugh, full and warm, and pulled her close. They had survived murder and betrayal and their own worst impulses. They had found their way back to each other through guilt and grief and the stubborn refusal to let go. They were finally, impossibly, home. Lord Nathaniel Meredith was hanged on a gray November morning, almost exactly 2 years after Edward's death. Seraphina did not attend the execution, but she visited his grave once, after it was done. She didn't know what she expected to feel. Satisfaction, perhaps, or closure. Instead, she felt only a distant sadness for the man he might have been, if obsession hadn't twisted him into a monster. "It's over," she said to his headstone. "You can't hurt anyone else." Then she turned and walked away, back toward the carriage where Caspian waited, back toward the life they had built together. She never visited the grave again. The years that followed were full in ways neither of them had dared to imagine. They had children, 3 of them, born over the next decade. a son who inherited his father's intensity and his mother's courage. Twin daughters who proved to be as fierce as they were beautiful. Caspian proved to be an unexpectedly devoted father, spending hours in the nursery despite the objections of society, matrons who insisted that dukes didn't change nappies. "My children," he said firmly, when one particularly bold countess suggested he was setting a bad example. "My nappies to change." Seraphina laughed for a week. The guilt never fully left Caspian. He still woke sometimes in the night, haunted by the choice he had made, the death he had failed to prevent. But Seraphina was always there, warm and solid and real, reminding him that forgiveness was a process, not a destination. "You made a terrible mistake," she told him once, years into their marriage. "But you've spent every day since trying to make it right. And that matters. That matters more than you know. I still don't deserve you." "Probably not," she smiled. "But I don't deserve you either. So we're even." "I used to dream about being believed," Seraphina told Caspian one evening, 30 years after their wedding night. They were sitting in the library at Stormhaven, watching their grandchildren play in the garden below. Caspian's dark hair had gone silver. Seraphina's brown curls were streaked with white. They had grown old together, weathering decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and loss. "When I was that widow in black," she continued, standing alone at funerals while everyone whispered about my curse, "I used to dream about someone seeing the truth." "And now?" Caspian asked, his arm around her, his scarred cheek pressed against her hair. "Now I understand something I didn't then." Seraphina turned to look at him. This man who had changed everything, who had fought for her and with her, who had loved her imperfectly, but truly for 3 decades. Being believed isn't about rescue. It's about recognition. It's about someone looking at all of you, the grief and the strength, the flaws and the virtues, and saying, "Yes, this is who I choose." "I chose you," Caspian said. "The moment I saw you at that concert, closing your eyes during the cello suite. I chose you then, and I've chosen you every day since. Even when I discovered the calendar, even when I walked out, especially then." He kissed her softly. "Because you came back. Because you chose to love me anyway, despite everything I'd done. That was the moment I knew I would spend the rest of my life earning your trust." "And have you?" "Earned it." Caspian was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, the same smile that had transformed his severe features 30 years ago, the same smile that still made her heart skip. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'll spend whatever time I have left trying." Seraphina leaned against him, watching their grandchildren chase each other through the rose garden. The sun was setting over the moors, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and she thought she had never seen anything so beautiful. "You know what I never told you," she said, "about that night at the concert?" "What?" "When I closed my eyes during the cello suite, I wasn't just listening to the music. I was wishing." Her voice softened. "I was wishing that somewhere in the world there was someone who could see me. Really see me. Not the curse, not the widow, not the cautionary tale. Just me." "And did your wish come true?" Seraphina smiled. "What do you think?" She kissed him then, soft and tender, the kiss of 2 people who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger on the other side. "I love you," she said. "I love you, Caspian Wyndham. I love your obsession and your intensity and your ridiculous devotion. I love that you nearly destroyed yourself with guilt and let me save you anyway. I love that you've spent 30 years proving you're worthy of forgiveness. And am I? Worthy?" "No," she smiled. "But I forgive you anyway, because that's what love is. choosing someone despite their flaws, choosing them again and again, every day, even when it's hard. Even when they watched you from doorways like a deranged stalker? Even then, she laughed, the snorting laugh he had always found enchanting, and pulled him closer. Even then. They sat together as the sun went down, two people who had been broken and healed and broken again, who had found their way back to each other through darkness and light. She had been cursed once, or so the world believed. But the truth was simpler and more beautiful. She had been loved, imperfectly, obsessively, desperately loved, and that had made all the difference.